thank you, professors, to be here. Thank you, all the guests. My name is Borhane Ayed. I used to be a student at Ecole de Saint-Etienne. I did an engineering degree. Then I reached Ecole Polytechnique and entails to do their master in economics. And I specialized in game theory and decision theory with applications to political economics, to public economics, globally public finance, and monetary economics a little bit. And my supervisor at that time was Professor Yukio Koriyama, here present. Am I saying it well? Koriyama, sorry.
That's right.
Thank you. And then I started a PhD in the economics of corruption, and that I stopped for personal reasons and also a little bit of technical reasons because I wasn't good enough, I think, in game theory to do what I wanted to do. So our panel, you will have the chance to present yourselves afterwards. So as you can see, I'm wearing a t-shirt saying keep calm and utility maximize. So this t-shirt I got from a website about economics, meaning that we have to keep calm in this conference. And utility maximize, utility is a term, a technical term in economics, but it means, let's say, well-being. It's very close to the notion of well-being and to the notion of happiness, and it's something that is still not well defined, first. And second, as you might see behind me, I have a jacket, small jacket by chance. It's a jacket of fishers for fishing. And in Tunisia, fishing, and in many other countries, when we say fishing, we say police trying to catch criminals or corrupt people or something. We say big fish. Even in France, we say un gros poisson. It means someone very corrupt, someone very important. That.
Oui, je suis dans cette conférence-là. C'est arrivé à 6 heures? Ok, très bien.
Excellent. Okay, all right. So last weekend, I was walking by the sea on the beach, and there was this old man fishing, and those people are the ones who you learn the most from in Tunisia. So I asked him, "Are you fishing? Do you have some fish around?" He said, "No, but you know, I'm doing this for pleasure." And then I turn around and I see a big police car moving. So I don't know if maybe I'm paranoid, maybe this country is very special, maybe I have a great sense of humor, but anyway, here in Tunisia we have a great repugnancy for corruption, and we always see fishers are people who can sometimes help the police, sometimes give you some information, and this information is very, very important in Tunisia. Anyway, so corruption. The aim of this meeting is to try to give a new definition for corruption. So corruption is a very old and deep phenomenon in humanity. Professor Zahia Jouirou can tell you this afterwards. It has always been considered as something bad, as something, as Susan Rose Ackerman says in her book, Economics of Corruption, something repugnant, something that we don't like. The word itself, corruption, is something, she says, for example, for a a young person who is playing violent video games, that those violent video games are corrupting this childhood. So corruption has this intuitive sense of something we don't like. But the problem comes when there's a big problem, I think, because I read a lot of papers about corruption, especially in the economics of corruption, where they try to define corruption as the misuse of public power for private benefits. Misuse of public power for private benefits, the first two ideas that came to my mind when I was still doing my master's is that when you say public power, it means the government or the state. Maybe I'm an economist, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not in law, I don't understand well what's going on. But when you say public power, it means that the person is has already public power. So the problem is that corruption in that sense will include only the public sector. And as a consequence, when we try to fight against corruption, even with very, very strong means, even if we are doing it for good reasons, even if we have strong institutions to fight against corruption, at the end of the day, we are going to be fighting the state, the institutions. For example, those days we have two big problems of corruption in Tunisia. I mean, two big affairs. The Farfekh, which is the prime minister of our country, we say the Farfekh gate, but it's something between corruption and conflict of interest. It's not that clear, but the thing is that it's our prime minister. And our prime minister is maybe involved, maybe not. This is not my job to say. But the institution of prime ministry is being attacked. So in the mind of normal people, in the mind of citizens, in the mind of voters, we have this picture of prime ministry as something that can be corrupt, and it's very, very dangerous. Same thing for the director of our parliament. The director of parliament, I mean, his political party whatsoever doesn't mean anything for me. I don't want to talk about politics in this thing, but the head of our parliament is being attacked those days for corruption, and in the mind of the normal citizen lambda, the parliament is something that can be easily corrupt. So this definition by itself creates great ambiguity and makes the people who want to fight against corruption fight against the state at the end of the day. So that's very, very deep, I think, and very problematic. So thank God I had Professor Koriyama as a supervisor. When I presented my master thesis, it was called A Model of Political Corruption, and it was about buying votes. So who of you, please, professors, the four of you, think that vote buying is corruption? Raise your hands, please. Okay, so now just Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky thinks that vote buying is corruption because she has this intuitive feeling that vote buying is corruption. But given the current definition, vote buying has nothing to do with corruption because the political parties involved in this are still not in power. So it's not using public power for private benefits. It's not considered as corruption. So Professor Koriyama at the time told me, okay, well, we have this definition. You are naming your master thesis a model of political corruption, but it's not corruption. So I told him this definition. The definition I'm trying to present at the moment, which is, like, I always use this sign, which is, we have rap singers here, people who like rap music. This sign is to say we have two entities, okay? Two entities that can be moral, physical. I think people from law sciences can be more able to formulate this thing. But in my head, as an economist, I see them as two economic agents, okay? So we have two economic agents who are going to create a contract or a trust relationship. It depends whether you are in the US or the American school and you say contract. If you are in China, you are definitely going to say a trust relationship. So a trust, a contract, and there's this third party who comes to one of them and plays on their incentives so that this person breaks the contract. This will so that C is better off, so that the small finger here, the one coming out and breaking the contract, will be better off, will have a better utility, will maximize his utility, his well-being will be better. Okay, and in that case, the old definition of corruption, which is misuse of public power, for example, by a bureaucrat for private benefits. For example, I give some money to a bureaucrat so that he passes my, I don't know, he doesn't let me go to jail. This definition becomes a specific case. This old paradigm becomes a specific case. How? The state is just A, the betrayed, B is the bureaucrat, and C is myself, because I gave him the money. So there is this contract between the state and the bureaucrat, which is a labor contract, and I break this contract by giving money to this bureaucrat, and I'm better off, and that's it. So this is my definition, and in that case, vote buying becomes a part of corruption. So even let's say the private sector can become a part of corruption. We can consider now officially the private sector as part of corruption, and we can study the problems in the private sector as corruption problems. For example, Professor Zahia Jouirou and Professor Yukio Koriyama have the same degrees. They have the same abilities. They are from the same field. They have the same experience in work, and they both work for a company. Okay, and there is we are waiting for one of them to reach a higher degree in work. Okay, so Professor Koriyama or Professor Jouirou are going to be director, right? One of them gives money to the great director of the company and takes the place, wins, right? I don't think that this is currently considered as corruption. I think that it is more considered as, I don't know the word in English, but it's tahayyul. I mean, maybe Mr. Chaker Mzoughi can help me. It's when you don't play the game in the right rules. You are not playing the games. You are cheating. Yeah, it's considered as cheating. It's considered as I don't know, pot de vin. It's considered, but not as corruption in this old definition. This is what I believe. I'm not sure of what I'm saying, but this is mostly what I'm believing. So, finally, vote buying becomes a corruption problem as well. So, for example, we had this candidate for the presidential elections who was arrested like 1 month before the presidential elections in Tunisia, and he was arrested for corruption, and then he was out, and then he reached the second tour of the election, because corruption was not the right thing to say. I mean, maybe you could accuse him of vote buying, maybe you can accuse him of cheating, cheating in an election, but corruption is not the case, is not the right case. So he almost won. Anyway, now corruption, in my sense, is a natural phenomenon. What does that mean? It means that now, for example, when I ask the question, who believes that vote buying is a corruption problem, only Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky raised her hand. Okay, so I made a sort of corruption, because between Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky and Professor Yukio Koriyama and Professor Chaker Mzoughi and Professor Zahia Jouirou, there's this strong relationship of trust and academic relationship that I see in this model, try to break. And what I did was, in some sense, corruption. So this is a very, very general definition, and a very, I think, maybe dangerous definition, because it has to be seen as something really theoretical. We cannot put anything behind the notion of corruption, because anything can be considered of corruption. Any sort of contract breaking or trust breaking can be considered as corruption. So lawyers and persons in law have to understand that this definition is really, really to take avec des pincettes. Finally, and so it happens to everyone, it happens every day, and the main problem is that when it becomes a social norm. So when you have corruption as a social norm, you cannot have contracts, you cannot have trust between people, and what's going to happen is that the economy can collapse. The economy can have great damages, and I'm an economist, so I think of the economy first. You imagine an economy where everyone who is going to sign a contract wonders, maybe this contract is not going to work, maybe it's going to end up being corrupt. So why am I signing a contract? I mean, a labor contract, a house contract, for example, for Schumpeter, a entrepreneur investor contract, anything can be collapsed. And Professor Mzoughi worked on the power of paper money, I think, as trust. Even paper money, which is a social contract, can be, people can end up not trusting the central bank. Corruption can even create inflation and deflation, in my sense. So it's a deep phenomenon, and it's between economics and law. So we have to take care of this, I think. Finally, I'm just going to talk about two important solutions that I heard of. The first one is whistleblowing. Whistleblowing is when somebody sees this phenomenon of corruption and goes to the authorities and says, well, I've seen some corruption. This whistleblower can be can be A, can be B, and can be somebody from outside who have seen this happening. And so we have to protect those whistleblowers. And second, asymmetric punishment, which is proposed by Professor Kaushik Basu in a paper and in his book that Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky advised me with, The Republic of Beliefs, where only C should be punished. Well, when he proposed this, he was not in the paradigm of the definition I'm talking about. But anyway, if I translate it to this new definition, it becomes C should be punished, only C should be punished. So only the person who comes from outside and tries to break the contract must be punished. In the sense that, for example, I'm stopped by a policeman, and a policeman asks me to give him money, or I give him money, or whatsoever. So it can be B or C who proposes first, and this is also something to think about. Is it an active corruption? Is it passive corruption? Are those social norms imposing on us corruption? Is it a social equilibrium? What's going on in game theory and in evolutionary game theory? All this is really, really, we have a lot of work to do. But anyway, imagine, so the policeman asks you about the 10 dinars, for example, and to let you go. You give him the 10 dinars and you go. So in our current law, both of you and the policeman are punished. So if the law becomes only the policeman is punished, then, and you receive back your 10 dinars if you go to the authority and tell them the story, then the policeman will not even have the courage to ask you for those 10 dinars. Because when he asks you, he knows that you are going to say, yes, mister, take those 10 dinars, and he knows that you are obviously going to the authority, that he is obviously going to be punished, and you are obviously going to get back your 10 dinars. You are a whistleblower, and if you are protected, he is in big trouble. So that's it. That's one of the main solutions I found and I liked. So that's my intervention. Thank you, everybody. I think you should start talking. We can take this order: Professor Koriyama, then Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky, then Professor Chaker Mzoughi, then Professor Zahia Jouirou. Maybe some idea for Professor Koriyama. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about this, but maybe what do you think of lobbying, for example? Maybe it's an idea that you could tell us about, and the impact of vote buying maybe on social welfare or something. That's it. That's what I have to say. And of course, any one of the people who are here today can ask questions via the chat screen down right, where you can ask a question directly to the professor or to myself. That's it. Thanks. So, Professor Koriyama, I have to switch back. Okay. Oh. Is it okay for you? No? Demandez la réactivation du micro. Oh my gosh. I'm really bad at this.
Okay. I think it's okay now. So I have been trying to turn on the micro, but it was stopped. So now it's okay. So thank you, Borhane. Thank you for the introduction and then proposition of the new idea. I think it's appropriate, I think, to start with my involvement and how our relationship with Borhane started. I think it's a perfect introduction. I think you gave it to me. So when Borhane was studying at the master student, Borhane came to me he wanted to study corruption, and he wanted to do a PhD maybe, and then we discussed many times, and then every time, as you see from his speech right now, that I was very much impressed that Borhane has a very strong passion. It was very clear that he wants to solve this problem. He wants to contribute some way in the problem of corruption. So it was very much obvious that I have a pretty good confidence that Borhane has the nice ability, technical abilities to study it, and then I thought it is a good idea to start using game theoretical analysis. And so really that Borhane is very much passionate to organize this meeting, and I think it's a very nice thing to start. That's nice to do it. And obviously that, like a world have been witnessing a lot of corruption problems. We have a lot of corruption problems, and but especially Borhane had a background from Tunisia, and then he was telling me a story about the Jasmine Revolution, and then all the democratization and all these movements. And then I think that there are a lot of things to be understood. So obviously there are different areas which are involved, and then from our point of view, economic theory or economic of basically the mechanism design, it's the type of the things that we are familiar with. So it's not, of course, the only way to make some contributions, but I think it is a good way that we thought to understand the problems, and then find some ways to reduce the problems and the challenges that the countries are facing. So now I think that this definition of corruption that the Borhane proposes, it is general and it can involve many things. Maybe it's not overlapping exactly what we call corruption, but whatever the name it is, I think it's interesting to consider a new type of the model and then try to understand, to investigate what can be understood. So from my point of view, when we study corruption, as a game theorist, I use mechanism design model, I use like a game theoretical model, and try to understand the basic incentive behind. So let me cite one study that I think is the most relevant from my point of view, is the study of Roger Myerson. So Roger Myerson studied corruption in many papers, and his paper in 2008 studied also the moral hazard problem, but now his paper in 2015, there's a paper called Moral Hazard in High Office and the Dynamics of Aristocracy. So that paper is not published. He has been working for a long time right now, by now, and then latest version can be downloaded from his website. And he built a model to study how the history witnessed the corruption. And then,
excuse me, Professor, excuse me, because we have a lot of people not in economics, so maybe you could use more simple words, or at least who is Roger Myerson?
Oh, okay, well,
I don't know him.
Okay. So yeah, Roger Myerson is the Nobel Prize winner 2007, if I remember. And so he is the one of the contributors who made the concept of mechanism design. So he obtained the Nobel Prize with Leonid Horowitz and Eric Maskin. So he's really one of the professors who really conceptualized the idea of mechanism design. And the mechanism design is the area of research that can help understanding how we can design the rule or social norm or social institutions or even constitutions can be understood as the same framework of implementing some social welfare function. So we can design the message space and the function from the messages to the outcome. So in this way, that I think that understanding the corruption mechanism or incentive behind, there is a important area of insights that we need to obtain, and then that is the way how theoretical models can contribute. So I think that the relationship with these general ideas, like how society can suffer from the corruption problems, it is part of the intrinsic problem of the society, that the people may have like someone in the power, and then some officials who exercise the power, and then the law or institution or constitution would make the the rules. So in mechanism design, we call it mechanism, and then we call that as a function from the inputs to the outcome. And so this type of the idea would, I believe, that it would reveal or it would help our understanding about the problems which happens common in different areas of the world. And so that I hope that let's see. So now this is just a very first time. So Borhane just introduced this idea. So I hope that this new definition would help understanding theoretically the mechanism behind the corruption, and then like putting this A and B and C players. Maybe there are some common characteristics, and then that would help understanding, revealing that what would be the central problem in the corruption. And then if there is a common feature out of it, then maybe there's a policy to, there is a hint to reduce the corruption problems. And in order to have that, I think that the second really important area is that really the empirical study. So that is something like I have been pushing to Borhane while he was working at the Polytechnique, that Borhane has very good ideas about how to describe corruptions in Tunisia, especially. So there are many things I don't know. He knew about it, and so he was presenting that which area there are, what type of corruptions, and then even after the democratizations, that there are still certain types of corruption which exist, and I think it exists pretty much everywhere, but also some specific features in Tunisia that I think that collecting this data and analyzing this would be very much interesting, but because I think it is not that much done, as far as I know, in terms of economic study of corruption in Tunisia. So I think that would help, that would have academic value to provide empirical study to obviously test the theory, and the theory and the empirical data should come one after another, so it should be supplementary. So this type of empirical data is something which is not easy to obtain. Obviously, there is no census for corruption. There is no one politician who tells that, okay, I give the data about the corruption. There is nothing like that. So it is very challenging to obtain the data. But I think that with the passion of the Borhane, I think that empirical study or to think about the theorem and how theory and how the theory can be applied in the really concrete examples in Tunisian cases, I think that would have a very much promising future. So that is something I want to emphasize. And at the end, so you're talking about this vote buying and lobbying. So you're telling me, you're asking like if I think whether vote buying is corruption or not. So it's difficult to say. Like there are many different types of vote buying. So there are, in large sense, that many activities that if you can buy with some monetary transactions, then it's more like obvious corruptions. But there are things that you can transfer somehow, like exchanging, like some guy who store more votes from something like I really care about the voting. It's not necessarily a transaction between different individuals, but it can be among the same individual across time. So I can buy vote from my past myself. So if I can store my vote, if I don't care about this, but I want to store my vote for future other issues that I care more, then it can be legitimate. I think that this is a study which can be more studied by storable voting, and it's in the wide range of the examples can exist. So in wide sense, vote buying can be storable voting, and then there are other group of people who talks about quadratic cost for the voting, so it's called quadratic voting. So this type of the studies include, and then it is difficult to say all are bad or all are repugnant. We should be repugnant for all of them. I cannot just to say for sure. So I want to make some space for the useful way of vote storage or vote buying. So I keep myself not to say that the vote buying everything is bad. And so same thing about the lobbying. So lobbying can be understood as bad thing if it is done in certain ways. But certain other ways that lobbying help understand what do we need in the society. So making the group among the lobbyists and then make it explicit, that is also necessary for the healthy democracy. So that is also in the borderline. So sometimes like some type of lobbying could be seen as naturally as a undesirable thing, but some lobbying could be desirable. So I want to be not to be much too much like how can I say, like making it black or white, but I leave that to be more general, to see as Borhane make corruption concept as more general. I want to make it that like vote buying or lobbying can be more general concept. All right, so maybe I talked pretty much what I want to say. So I'm very happy to listen to you guys. So I want to know, I'm very much interested, we are from different areas. So I want to learn from you guys. So let me finish at this point now. Any questions? And I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, maybe we can take questions from the audience. Anyone who wants to ask a question to Professor Koriyama from the audience? This can be, he still has time, so any one of you guys, anyone, really.
Okay, so Ariane wrote this, what is the name of the Meyerson paper? It's, I think it's called the Power paper in Rogers. So if you go to Roger Meyerson's website, I think all the working paper is downloaded, so can be downloaded. And then the title I have here, title is Moral Hazard in High Office and the Dynamics of Aristocracy.
Okay. Maybe you could, the audience, I mean, not the panel discussers, because they will have the time to discuss, but the audience, I mean, Bayram Abdelmalek, Anis Marrakchi, Furat Nafeti, Haifat Bib, I see a lot of people. You can ask questions.
So Anis was, yeah, okay, my student, I see, okay.
Yeah, right.
Okay, nice to have him here.
Maybe, Anis Marrakchi, I think he sent the address for the... Bayram Abdelmalek is asking, so to Professor Koriyama or to myself, why are you asking to...
Would you consider possibility of a non-physical entity, for example, poverty or presence opportunity as a presence possible C? I think it's a question for you.
Yeah, well, the thing is that well, it's difficult to, yeah, for me, when you say corruption is an act, it's this act of breaking a contract. So we can say a moral entity or a physical entity. It's this act, this notion of corruption is something related to this bad behavior of betrayal and in some sense. But here we are interested more in the law and economics. So it's not, I'm not in philosophy, I'm not doing philosophy. So we need practical things. We need really, things that we can use in economics or in, in economics or in law, so that lawyers and economists could use. So when you say poverty is corruption and you are going to, well, if you want to fight against poverty, feeling that this is corruption, you can do it. You're welcome to do it, but you cannot put poverty in jail. That's my idea. Maybe Professor Koriyama, you can answer Anis Marakshi. Yeah, okay. Principal agent problem. Let me remember this. Principal agent model, you have two agents. Where's the third one? Who is A? If you consider that B and C are the same. Well, I think, Anis, this is a very good idea. The principal agent model includes two agents, two economic agents. If you would like to consider B and C as the same, maybe we end up having this problem. But I would prefer to have B and C two different entities, so that it becomes a three entities problem. So I don't understand. Okay, thank you. He said thank you. So we move to Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky. Is that fine? Everybody. All right. We are exactly at the good time. That's all. Well, I think Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky is going to talk a lot about those problems that Lasad here present is talking about. So I let the word to Professor Lambert-Mogiliansky. Professor.
Okay, so thank you. And first, I'm sorry I might not be able to stay until the end. I had misunderstood the Tunis time and Paris time, actually. So first, let me say that I am currently very interested in definition of new definition of corruption. And one of the reasons is that the current situation, and especially the definition that we've been using in economics, does not allow for a useful analysis of what is happening. And indeed, we have a perception of a lot of what is happening is corrupt at the very high level of power, and still it is completely institutionalized. So one example I want to give, because I've been working on that lately, is BlackRock. I don't know if you know what BlackRock is. BlackRock is the first asset management in the world. It has about 7 trillion in assets it manages, and it has direct investment. And they have been chosen by, and they are owning a large share of global banks and national banks. They have been chosen by the European community to devise the new regulation in the Green Deal. This regulation is the pillar of the European Green Deal, this financial regulation which takes into account environment, social and governance aspects. So the whole thing is completely according to the law. And anyone who looks at it, and there have been some really outrage about that, is that people who are actively interested in those issues and have clearly very large interest in the object of those regulations should not be the one who do the regulation. And more generally, what we have seen lately is that we have what has been called in transition economy state capture, that we have the people interested. They don't need to be corrupt because they are designing the rule themselves. And still, we would like to have some definition of corruption that allows that to capture that. And looking backward in history, there have been other definitions of corruption which were much broader. And the idea was that eventually it had to do with the definition, the distribution, and the relationship between wealth and power in society. Maybe what you call contract, but it's far beyond the formal legalist aspect. It's much deeper. So, and I think that is really what I feel very frustrated about, because in economics we do have tools, and one of the main theory, I would say, is called the so-called regulatory capture theory, which has been divided. This is something maybe you know, maybe I should not exemplify, but explain a little bit. That is a principal agent with an intermediary level, which is generally the bureaucrat, and the principal is supposed to be a benevolent government. And because of an asymmetry of information, you can have collusion between the client and the intermediary. And this is a theory, and this is where I may be joining you, Borhane, a little bit, has been developed by...
I think it's Lafont and Tirole, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, but it was far beyond that.
Okay. I mean, just the problem is that here, Lafont Tirole, it's still not touching the private sector.
Of course it is. Of course it is, because the client is the private sector. The client...
Yeah, but there's the benevolent state. I mean, in my sense, maybe there should be a benevolent private person. You see what I mean?
No, I can't. But anyway, I want to continue, and I think it's very difficult to how we deal with the private sector, and we also have other example of private corruption, which is now accepted, where two private actors like the auditor and a private firm, they enter into collusion and they do something which is fooling the market, which the state is supposed to defend. That is also happening, and it has huge consequences for the functioning of the economy. So where I wanted to join you, Borhane, was not maybe as you thought, but the idea of regulatory capture, which was originally developed by the Chicago School, is something which was really part of an idea that the state is bad, indeed, that the state is something bad, and they were showing it through that idea that, you know, it can be captured, so it should be reduced, it should be minimized. But now what I believe they have, well, not be looking at, and maybe on purpose, is that actually regulatory capture. What is regulatory capture? You do have rules, and those rules are captured. You pay a bribe to someone who is supposed to apply the rules. And this is the standard thing as Chaker. I mean, this is the legal thing that is being viewed under corruption. But then the capture we see today in our democratic society, but I'm interested in what's happening in the developed world right now, is that actually the capture is on the rule-making itself. So you cannot talk about corruption. You know, you give free, you don't, Google and NAFTA, they don't have to pay taxes. It's not that they have to pay someone so that they will reduce their taxes. They just pass laws. And that's not the only one. The rich managed to pass laws and they will get 3 trillions or 1 trillion, I don't remember, huge money back. Isn't that corruption? I would like to say that it is corruption. How can we do, this is why I'm interested in that debate, to make it back in our models, to have tools. It's not about, asymmetric information. It's something else. I'm not clear about it because at some level it appears to be so obvious. So it's growth, but it's not so obvious. It's a corruption which is multifaceted. Like, in France now, they are passing a new law to basically give a bigger hand on the research to the private sector. And at the same time, we know that, experts are ruling the society and experts are in the hand of money. So again, that's a way to give the hand to the wealth in the wealth and power balance and contract. So that's, I think, where there is something very important to be done by all the people interested and specialized in those issues, because we are facing a corruption of society which is so deep, and with the consequences are terrible for our time and humanity and their environment as well. I don't know how about the time. I didn't look when I started, actually.
Perfect, Professor. You talked for 10 minutes exactly, and we can take some questions if you want to. But the questions should target directly Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky.
So maybe I will add the last thing.
Yeah.
Talking about lobbying as well. So on the lobbying side, the European community is very interesting as well, that BlackRock, which is really the one interesting me, they are putting millions of euro to influence decisions. And it is not about providing good information. It's about influencing the decision. Isn't that something we would like to call corruption? I think it is. On the other side, you would say there is competition, but it's wealth again. It's another path for wealth to influence power. And it's not, and that is an issue. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, so I think everybody can ask questions to Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky. Also, Professor Yukio Koriyama, you can ask her questions if you want to. Right. And everyone can ask her questions because we have 5 minutes now.
You have to open the microphone for.
I have to open the.
Who wants to speak?
Yeah. Professor Koriyama, is it fine?
Yeah. Well, I have been trying to activate, but it was still. No, it's very nice point. No, I don't have really the question. I just agree that this is the part of the things that should be considered as corruption. It's a very important point, and that's totally agree.
Okay, so if we have questions from the audience, anybody for Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky? Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky, you did, yeah. So Anis Madakshi. He says, how do we protect institutions and rule-making from capture?
Well, I guess this is.
Well, maybe we should define first what is capture in this sense, because you.
Okay, so there are two kinds of capture. As I said, there is regulatory capture, and there we do have we have laws to fight regulatory capture. But I would like to say something about state capture, which is rule making, the capture of the rule making in society. And I believe this is some form of mechanism of accountability that should be strengthened, that should be devised in a better way. I don't think the electoral accountability is enough at all, but we should have more transparency and more accountability. And there I do hope, and I have some work on that, recent work about mechanism of accountability, that our tools can be somehow useful. I mean, our toolbox, especially game theory and mechanism design. What is accountability? Accountability is to make people responsible for, to claim responsibility. If you, for instance, and this is what is going on with BlackRock, to go back. So the European Commission made a decision to give, through a perfectly competitive procedure, they won the contract. And there the accountability is being asked by the parliament, saying that how can you give the contract to a firm that has vested interest of that kind? And the answer, yes, but everyone is, all the experts are supposed to be, have conflict of interest, which is not necessary if they were an independent science existing. And so we are pushing for accountability. We are asking the EU and asking the EC again and again and again to justify what is accountability, is requesting the decision maker to justify their decision and asking again until people are satisfied. Currently, it's not the case, and the question has gone to the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman is taking over for some part. There are also grassroots organizations which can play a role in accountability. It's accountability. This is what it's about, I believe. I don't know if it...
Professor Lambert-Mogiliansky, I remember one of your papers, recent papers, I think 2018, was about bureaucrat and accountability and 5 or 6 steps game. Do you remember that one? Maybe you could share.
Yeah, we have social accountability.
Yeah, that's it.
2015, and a recent paper that just came out on accountability in public tenders. And the idea is to use the information of interested party to create check and balances.
Yeah, that's it. Accountability in public tenders. Public tenders means, in French, it's appel d'offres. It's munaqsa in Arabic. It means when the government wants to buy something from societies, from firms, and to make projects. And this especially is one of the most corrupt sectors in Tunisia.
Yeah. So
so maybe you can give us some insight about what's the paper about?
Very shortly, the idea is that you should use the interest of competing firms, and you should use the fact that they would like to win the contract, and their information about the market structure and about things that the public decision maker may not know. I mean, not the corrupt one, but the idea, excuse me, I should go back a step before. The idea is that you have a problem in public tender, the way they are formulated, the way you design a project will have an impact on who wins. Okay, you can design a project so a firm has better chance to win it. And this is something that happens very often. And this is a very difficult type of corruption to prosecute. I don't know if Chaker has something to say about that later, but it's very difficult to say, you know, the idea you need a contrafactual, what would it have been if there was another design? So what we do in this paper is to say that other firms have an information and would say, I can understand that this project has been fine-tailored for this firm. And we use that information in a mechanism to orient an audit, to say, well, why did you ask for this specific aspect? And we show that this is a way to drastically reduce corruption. And actually, so this is, the whole idea is using interested party like here, other firms or civil society or the private sector to force accountability on the decision maker. The problem being that it's very difficult to put the right question to the decision maker. Okay, so that's how it works.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky. So you can leave us whenever you want. As you said, you have some things to do. So now,
yes, so I have still a few minutes. I'll stay.
Good, very good. So now is the turn for Professor Chaker Mzoughi from the Department of Law, Qatar University, who used to create a master's degree in Tunisia with Professor Ariane Lambert-Mogiliansky in Faculté des Sciences Juridiques for fighting corruption. The master's is a professional master's and it's done for economists or lawyers. That's more or less what I wanted to say. That's the relationship. Okay. So, no. So, Professor Mzoughi, could you, or do I? Can you activate your microphone? Okay, good.
Hi, everybody. You heard me?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, first, I would like to express the pleasure of participating in this debate on a problem that interests me closely. Thanks, Borhane. Then I would like to express my heartful felt thanks to Borhane for the organization of this seminar, which is for me a real opportunity to meet new interesting people, but also, as you said, to reconnect with old relationships, and in particular my friend for years, Madame Lambert, with whom I shared with great joy the difficulties and the delivery of the birth of our dear baby. And I'm talking here about our master's degree in good governance and fighting against corruption at the University of Qatar in Tunisia. In this paper, let me speak in these few moments that are generously granted to me by the organizer about legal question, not in economic approach as done by my colleagues. So I speak about legal corruption or the legalization of corruption. Let me first limit the purpose of this study. The object of this research is not, as several previous studies have done, so is not to demonstrate how corruption can rise and increase despite the existence of an institutional and legal framework that criminalizes it. As you know, this result is established now, and several studies have been devoted to it. The question that interests me here is rather to try to demonstrate how the law, in the broad sense of the term, that means it includes the legislative text of Parliament as well as the regulatory text issued by other authorities or powers in the state. So how the law becomes in itself an instrument, a tool, a means of corruption. In other words, it is not an illegal behavior. These are not behavior which defy an existing law and which criminalize certain acts considered as acts of corruption. it is not a problem of lack of legitimacy for these acts. However, these are laws that are created to institute corruption. Law created to institute corruption. These are laws in the service of corruption. It is not corruption of individuals, it is corruption of institutions. The specificity or the importance of this hypothesis appears first through the difficulty of defining in this case corruption, because there is an absence of a legal standard, absence of a standard or a model of behavior. Also, through the difficulty of sanctioning this corruption, which is in perfect harmony and consistency with law. Of course, we agree that breaking the law is not necessarily an indication of corruption. We know that corruption can take place in the absence of any violation of the law, and the violation of the law does not necessarily imply that there is corruption. That said, the law remains an important element in the fight against corruption, and in particular, to fight against it and to punish it. Therefore, how to sanction an act, corruption, that is not legally defined and determined? This is not only against the protection of the authors of these acts, who can only be prosecuted and sentenced and punished according to a prior legal text. This is the famous principle of the legality of crimes and penalties. But always also, this is an important for the proper functioning of the public service of justice. Finally, this hypothesis raises an even more serious question, which is that of the citizens' trust in democratic institutions. That means, what becomes of society whose members have lost their trust in the authority that is supposed to establish a certain balance in social relationships? Because it is this idea of balance achieved, or the balance lost, or the balance violated, which seems to constitute the core of the definition of corruption, and we will have, I think, discussions about that.
Excuse me, Professor. So you join here the idea of Professor Lambert-Mogiliansky in the notion of state capture.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
So every society operates according to certain balances. These balances are determined according to elements specific to each society. So the degree of respect of these balances by the various stakeholders, I mean by stakeholders, powers, authorities, and individuals. So the degree of respect for these balances by the various stakeholders determines the absence or the rate of corruption in this society. There is a link between them. Far from pretending to draw up an exhaustive list of these laws, which is impossible, it is a question in this research of focusing on a particularly sensitive area. These are the laws relating to political field. And I think that our colleague Yukio will be interesting to this question. Because laws relating to political field fall into two categories. The first one is related to laws directly related to the exercise of political activity, such as laws on elections, laws on political parties, laws about financing of political activities, etc. The second category of these laws is indirectly linked. The first one is directly linked. The second one is indirectly linked to political life, such as laws on taxes, laws on duties, investments, conflict of interests, public procurement, as said by Borhane. But as we can see, the field of research, however limited, remains very vague and risks not leading to credible results. It is for this reason that I have decided to further limit the field of research to the laws promulgated in the period of democratic transition. Why this choice about democratic transition? First, this period is often characterized by what it is called legislative inflation. We have a lot of laws, not only in terms of the number of the text of law, but also in view of the areas covered by this legislative effort. So this period can be a real case study. Then, the second reason, this period is supposed to establish the pillars of a new democratic era that meets the expectations of citizens who have suffered from corruption. Laws are supposed to be the best cleaning tool to restore the lost balance in society. This is the period when all expectation in democracy and freedom and equality, balance are legitimate. Finally, and this is the third reason for my choice, there is in principle in the spirit, democratic transition, a freedom of expression, a kind of, as called by some authors, a kind of anarchy, which can be negative or positive, and which makes it possible to oppose all abuses on the part of the authorities of the powers who remain under the crosshairs of the media and the civil society. However, paradoxically, all the studies and reports carried out by both national and international organizations clearly demonstrate that legal corruption has increased. And I mean by legal corruption, texts of law who was in the origin of this corruption. There are more texts that consecrate corruption. That is to say, texts that undermine the economic, the political, and the social balance in society.
Excuse me, Professor.
Sorry?
When you say those texts are here to encourage corruption, or let's say they encouraged corruption, maybe not on purpose, what definition of corruption are you using? Is the when you say it's encouraging corruption, is it something that you intuitively feel, or are there definitions in our constitution in Tunisia, for example? Let's say,
as you know, there are many definitions and legal definitions about corruption, but all studies agree that these definitions are often insufficient, and because there are many factors that enter in account to define corruption, and we usually refer to economists to give us a definition of corruption, and based on this definition we make laws. But in my sense, I didn't finish my research, but actually I'm working about a new definition about corruption, and which is focused on the idea of balance, which I defined in the first of my paper. This idea of balance in the society. In every society, there is an idea of a balance, équilibre, balance. And this balance, this idea differs from society to another society. So if this balance is violated, is not respected, it will be corruption. But the object of my paper here is not to define corruption, but to determine, to demonstrate that how law can be a source of corruption as defined or as presented by the other authors. You see?
Yes. I see. That's wonderful. Good luck for your paper, by the way.
Yes, thank you. So, has the problem of demonstrating the deviation of the legal rule from its real mission. The object of my paper is to demonstrate how instead of establishing and safeguarding balance in society, because this idea of balance is very important in this research, how it becomes a means of breaking this balance. In other words, instead of fighting corruption, the law becomes an instrument of corruption. And the answer to this problematic issue or this problem will be through two levels, but I will not make it now, just to announce you the plan of my research. The first level will be the creation of law, the relation between creation and law and creation or increasing of corruption. And the second level will be the implementation of the law, how it can be a source or a reason of encouraging or increasing corruption. And thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
I spent the time.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. We are in time. If any member from the audience have any question to Professor Mzoughi, maybe I don't think that people here have strong law background, but maybe Professor Zahia Jouirou can ask you some question, because I know she's very she has strong background in law. And anyone from the audience, anything, even small questions, it's not a problem. You are really welcome. I think there are no questions. Yeah, I asked. Yeah.
Bahrain Abdel Malik.
Yeah, Bayram Abdel Malik. Yeah, I asked. Yeah, I didn't see the question.
I can read it aloud. Are there suggestions for accountability mechanisms for legislation and state-instituted law other than democratic accountability and, in quote, voting, which empirically can be proven to be easily corruptible? That's, I read it loud.
Well, I don't see the question. So that was a question for you, Professor Ariane Lambert, but maybe that question can be redirected to Professor Mzoughi, with if Bayram could ask it somehow more easily. Other suggestions? Yeah. So what do you think, Professor Mzoughi?
Are there suggestions for accountability mechanisms for legislation and state institute laws other than democratic accountability voting, which empirically can be? I think that Professor Lambert is better than me to answer
Professor Koriyama, right? Also Professor Koriyama. What do you think, Professor? Are there some other ways to express democracy other than voting?
That's something else. I can answer to that after.
Yeah, yeah. I think for myself, I would say negotiation is very important also. Yeah, but
so, I want to mention one thing which is now being more widely accepted, and this is sortition. That is, people are not elected, but they are randomly chosen, and they form an assembly. And under sometimes they will discuss an issue and make a proposal or decision. So that is a way. It's not accountability; it's an expression. And to get back to what Chaker said, I mean, very often corruption in political life is related to election incentives to be elected or re-elected. And a central idea is that with sortition, you don't have those incentives. But on the other side, you don't have accountability, because this question is very mixed. These people are not accountable. We just had in France a very interesting real experiment on environmental issue with la Convention citoyenne du climat. With la Convention citoyenne du climat, 150 citizens were taken randomly, representative of the whole, in a descriptive way of the population, so from 16 years to 80 years, and they just tried to respond, and they had access to all information they wanted, and this protects the decision from corruption in the sense that they are not elected, they don't need money to make a program, to talk about their ideas, and they are not viable because they don't want to be re-elected. So this is a way of protecting against two forms, at least, of corruption in the democratic life, in political life.
yeah, I think that was used in antique Greece, right?
Yes, indeed.
And also that is proposed by an economist, a French economist named Etienne Chouard, right?
Etienne
Chouard.
Chouard. I don't know. I don't
Maybe
know.
you don't know him, but he's a little bit. I don't want to enter into politics, but he proposed that idea.
Maybe marginal. The problem is that in economics we do not have the tools almost to understand the value of sortition and the value that the ancient Greeks gave to. And it's very interesting to read the ancient Greeks, who never considered elective democracy as a democracy. They called it elective aristocracy. It was never, it became, and there are books written now, it became the synonym of democracy, representative democracy, only after the French Revolution, and the idea was to keep the people away from politics in the meantime.
Very good. Thank you, Professor. So we reached the antique Greek era, so I think it's high time for Professor Zahia Jouirou to enter the debate. So I just let her. So could you, Professor Jouirou, can you activate your microphone? All right. All right.
Excuse me, Borhane. Excuse me.
Yes.
There is someone who is present with us, and he had 3 questions, and you never give him the answer.
Ah.
I saw the problem.
Because you have to. Okay, and okay, I don't see this. I don't know why.
Me, I saw that. No problem. So
maybe. Okay, maybe we should let Professor Zahia Jouirou finish, and then we take the questions for the ones who want to that, because we are already reaching 2 hours. So this is and then we can take as many questions as you want, but it's a 2-hour seminar, so that's the problem. And sorry for that person. Anyway, so Professor Mzoughi, could you cut off your please your microphone? Same for Professor Ariane. Okay, same for me. So Professor Jouirou.
Thank you, Borhane. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today, and also to learn many papers and studies about corruption and religion, and to realize that the studies in this field are rich and varied. As a professor of Islamic and compared religious studies, I will examine the hypothesis of a possible relation between religion and corruption. First of all, we can report some primary facts. All the religions reject and condemn closely corruption and all forms of corrupted actions and behaviors. As every human being and every believer is good by nature, the corrupted behavior considered as a deviation or aberration from the good to the evil, from the virtue to the sin, and also from the contract with God to the contract with the evil. And we can see also that the majority of religions consider that to be corrupted or uncorrupted is a personal matter and an individual responsibility, even when the believer or the person lives in a corrupted social environment or in difficult situations. In another hand, we have to take in consideration that there are different countries with the same religion, but their levels of corruption are widely different. We can just see and compare the levels of corruption in Catholic or Protestant countries, in both European and African countries, but also in Latin America. The same thing could be said about Islamic countries in South Asia, for example, and in the Arabic world. We can say that, for example, Singapore, where 15% of population are Muslim, has one of the highest level of transparency in the world, and in the Arabic world we find that the lowest level of we have in many Arabic countries, Muslim and Arabic in the Arabic world, the lowest level of transparency. These facts lead us to ask, what about the possible relation or connection between religion and corruption? Is this possible relation could be defined and measured? You surely know that to explain corruption, scholars take different approaches. The traditional approach adopted by many political scientists and economists focuses on economic, political, and administrative factors, sometimes on social factors. But recently, some research have criticized this approach for not taking the moral and the cultural dimensions of corruption into account. They have looked to religion as a starting point for understanding these dimensions and suggesting that religion influences corrupt actions. The effect of religion on corruption has been investigated in many studies, but we can see certain paradoxes about it. Some studies show that religion as a cultural index has a positive effect on corruption, and some others show that this effect is negative. Some scholars assert that religion can explain why corruption is more rooted in one society than another, even when these two societies have the same religion. Many other questions about a possible relation between religion and corruption has been raised during the last 3 decades, especially. We can easily notice that there is a growing interest in understanding the relations between religion and corruption and how religion affects corruption. Starting from the principle that religion can influence human behavior and actions, then it influences also the ways that people think and speak about the corruption, typically leading to condemnation. While many factors may contribute to a person's willingness to participate in a corrupt transaction, the influence of religion may be significant. That's why leaders of religious organizations and of religious institutions have become increasingly vocal in their condemnation of corruption, as honesty and fairness to third parties is universal to many religions. Leaders of many faiths are united in their opposition to corruption. Based on sacred texts, there is a consensus between all religions in the world on such condemnation and on rejecting corruption. However, it is also argued that in a systemically and on corrupt country, such condemnation is unlikely to influence actual corrupt behavior.
Professor Jouirou, now I have a small question. Now you say that all the religions are condemning corruption in some sense. When you say all the religions, I know your background, so you are talking about Abrahamic religions, Confucianism, Hinduism, all the humanitarian religions, humanity religions in all. But the thing is that in religions, we also have corruption. I mean, the term corruption exists, and when you say evil, for example, talks to the Muslim in his ear and asks him to give money to the policeman, it means that it's as if this phenomenon is natural in human being. Is that right? Do you think that?
No. From the religious point of view, the human being is by nature good, but corruption is a deviation from this good nature to a social, social or psychological behavior that lead the person to be corrupted. Corruption is not a natural behavior; it's a social behavior from the religious point of view. But the question for many studies was is the corruption the corruption is it from the religion itself, or is it from how the people understand and practice religions? How is it an institutionalized phenomena or a personal? It is more due to the person. And from the religious point of view, the religions are for the idea that to be corrupted is a personal responsibility, and even the believer live in a corrupted social environment or in a corrupted system. It is he is also responsible for his own behavior and own acts.
Okay, so what you are? Sorry.
But also the very interesting topic of many studies was how we can measure the impact of religion on on corruption. How we can define the corruption due to the religion, and how we can measure the impact of religion on corrupted behaviors or in corrupted situations or like
so
this.
Professor Jouirou, when you say
Excuse me, Borhane, the main question was: is there any causal link between corruption, the corruption in a whole system? For example, the corruption of the person, the corruption of the institution, or anything, or is there any causal link between the religion and corruption? To respond to this question, we can find 2 points of view. One point of view deny that there is a causal link between the religion as a institution or as a system and corruption. But the corruption is due to the how the person act as a religious person or as a believer. It's more personal. The corruption is more personal than its institutionalized phenomena.
Okay. Professor Ariane wants to ask something. Excuse me.
I'm just saying thank you. I have to leave. I had not planned to stay. I saw
No problem, Professor.
Thank you very much to all of you, and I hope we stay in touch and go further with this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.
So, Professor Jouirou, what I wanted to ask is that, as you say, in religions, they ask people not to be corrupt, and they let them think that corruption is a kind of a personal choice. So, in some religions, I don't know a lot about religions, but I know that, for example, the Protestant Revolution was a revolution on Catholicism where there was a strong institution between the human being and God. And same in Confucianism, for example, there is no direct relation, there is no institution, I might be wrong, but there is no strong institution between the the person and his own soul and his own beliefs and his God, and there is no institution. So do you think that those institutions and those strong institutions with those human behavior involved in it and those power and those conflicts can create corruption, and so that different religions can lead to different levels of corruptions in societies?
For me, I think that the causal link between religion and corruption is more closely related to religious commitment than to type of religion. We can, as I said, we can find easily that different countries have the same religions, but the levels of corruption and also the levels of transparency are widely different. What that means? That means that that we come back to the religious definition of corruption as an individual responsibility. It's not the responsibility of a system, or it's not the responsibility of a social environment. It's a personal choice. It's an individual responsibility. That's why I think that more attention should be paid to the problem of heterogeneity of religion across countries and the level of religious commitment in the analysis of the link between religion and corruption. I think also that more careful distinction between levels of religious commitment and types of religion when assessing religion corruption relations, because it is said by some in some studies that the institutionalized religions like
Catholicism or Sunni
like
Islam,
or, for example, like Islam, like Orthodox, l'orthodoxie, les Orthodox.
Orthodox
Are more there's more relation, the relation between corruption and religion in these religion is more distinct, is more it can be more shown than the relation between corruption and religion when the religion is individual, yani like in Protestantism or in Protestant and in Asian some Asian religions like in Hinduism. That's why I think that we have to pay more careful distinction between levels of between in one hand between levels of religious commitment and types of religions, and also between the types of religion themselves.
Perfect, Professor. Actually, maybe you don't know this, but there is a whole field in economics called economics of religion.
Yes.
Or religion economics. It's a whole field where you have people from religion studies and people from economics, and there is a department for this. There are professors specialized in this in Cambridge, in the UK, for example. We don't have this at Polytechnique, but maybe one day we will. Anyway.
The facts are very different, are so apart that we can't have only one result. For example, we find that corruption is found in Islamic and Catholic countries more than in the others. But also we can find that in Islamic countries themselves, there is different levels of corruption, and also in Catholic countries. When we compare between African Catholic countries and European Catholic countries, we find a great difference. Then is it the religion? Is there any causal link between corruption and religion? It's a question to be more and more studied.
That's it, Professor?
Yes, that's all.
Thank you all. So maybe we can have one or two last questions for Professor Jouirou. From anyone from the audience. We still have 10 minutes. Anyone from the audience who wants to ask any questions, any question to anyone, to any person, let's just do it. I think I don't see the messages. I don't know why, but Professor Mzoughi, you told us that we had questions that we didn't ask, we didn't answer. No person.
Yes,
Bayram, yes.
Yes, I think that there is nothing that can be used as final result about the relation between religion and corruption. Yes, there is some behaviors that are considered corrupted in some situation, and from a religious point of view is not considered as corrupted in other situation and from for example, when we compared between the religious situation in Europe before 100 years and now, we find a great difference between what was considered as corrupted in that time and what is considered corruption and what is from the religious point of view itself. We don't find the same point of view about the same situation from 100 years ago and now, because the religion we had from before 100 years, for example, the government have a great power on religion. Now with the
secularization, I think.
Yes, in this situation, the state have no power on the religion becomes individual. That's why we don't have the same situation to find the same result about the relation between corruption and religion in different times and in different situations and in different countries. These variables must be taken in when we want to think about this question.
Okay, so thank you everyone. Thank you everybody for attending this seminar. It was really, I learned a lot of things, and I'm sure that all of you did. Thank you professors for being here. Thank you the audience. And please let this project keep in touch. All of you, please keep in touch. Let this project become something better academically, in cinema, in music, in art, in whatsoever. It will help us, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For you, Borhane, and for all the professors.
Thanks. Thanks. Bye, Professor Koriyama.